But I just want to welcome everybody that's here at the moment. Just want to introduce everybody to Dr. Leonard Zaichkowsky. Is that how you have?
That's how you pronounce it. You got it right on.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Yeah.
For those that don't know, Dr. Len's an author. He's a researcher and professor at Boston University, and he's also done a bit of consulting work with some NBA teams, some NFL teams, Major League Baseball, Aussie rules, and as well as some football and Olympic teams around the world. So Dr. Len has been the pioneer, or been pioneering sports psychology by bringing neuroscience into the mix. I think we'll hopefully I've listed off all your accolades there.
That's all we need. That's all we need. Yeah.
So I guess the purpose of today is just to I guess help our coaches better understand what a playmaker is and decision making. So I guess I'll jump straight into it. You've got a book called The Playmaker's Advantage. What is a playmaker to you?
Well, I'd like to think that it's the simplest way to put it is probably the smartest player on the pitch, on the field, on the ice, in the court, wherever we all kind of recognize these brilliant individuals who kind of think the game differently. They've got such a wonderful awareness of the game space, and they're capable of making the correct decision most of the time. And then in the end, they don't screw up. They execute with precision too. So it's kind of those three parts that I write about quite a bit, is to kind of search for opportunities. And they've got this wonderful attentional focus that's extraordinary in most cases. And they're able to search out the important cues that they will help them, guide them in making those decisions. And then those decisions are made so darn quickly. They've automated it so well. And then they flawlessly execute. So when they can combine all those three components, they then become the playmaker. And the spin-off from that, of course, is that it makes everybody else around them a lot better. You know, I'm thinking as I'm watching the NBA playoffs, and I did some consulting before COVID with the Golden State Warriors, and to watch Steph Curry so brilliantly perform on the court, it's utterly amazing. But it's clearly those three components. He searches for those opportunities, he makes these quick decisions, and then executes with precision. He's as good an example as there is today.
Yeah.
At least in the sport of basketball. Yeah.
Yeah. So you talk about, Justin, there, you talk about search, decide, and execute. Are they genetic skills, you reckon, or are they something that, like you mentioned, Steph, are they just things that he's managed to, or skills that he's managed to acquire through that whole 10,000 hours of practice? And
I don't know if many of you in the room have read one of the earlier books, but David Epstein on the sports gene, where he really just went after the whole idea that there's a big genetic component to great athleticism. He says they've been searching for this sports gene for centuries and haven't found the damn thing. And probably, so basically he downplayed the whole role of genetics and performance. Now, and by and large, I support that idea. But the thing is, we're not all created equally, and many individuals have got a great advantage because of their genetic composition. They're bigger, stronger. They were born with some of those attributes, inherited them from their parents and grandparents, and so that the baseline isn't always the same. So that ability to search is not necessarily a genetic disposition, but clearly we know that there's some kids, and we're pretty just just smart, and we don't know where that came from. And it is possible that they've inherited some of that genetic attribute of cognition. I'm calling cognition, being just being smart. You can't learn everything in the environment. So what I'm saying is most of this is learned and developed, and with great coaches like you guys that will enhance that ability to search, and then that decision-making process. Again, that's kind of in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and we can't identify where the hell that came from, but probably there is a component of that that's passed on genetically. And then the execution part, that's all what you train them on the pitch, and it's maybe some athletes have a superior advantage genetically because of their size and so forth. But again, to the extent that they got into deliberate practice, that Anders Ericsson called deliberate practice, with the coaching staff, is how they were able to get to the point where they execute flawlessly. So again, most of these three components are learned skills, and that's why we lean on folks like you, great coaches, to help young athletes develop these attributes.
Cool. I just want to touch on something there. You talked about athlete cognition. How would you describe this, I guess, to our coaches? And probably another follow-up question to that would be like, what were some things that you would see how that's being trained? Like how do we train that athlete's cognition as coaches? Or
unfortunately, until now, not very well, because we haven't thought too much about that, training cognition. So let's go back and kind of define what makes up athlete cognition. And it's getting a lot of attention globally right now. This whole, what we call, my colleagues in Australia are calling cognitive fitness, trying to come up with an analog, since we all know what physical fitness is, or we could define it because we've been in most of our lives. But is there a parallel to that in the cognitive world, in the thinking world? Are there components of thinking that we call cognitive fitness that parallels physical fitness? And my good friends in Australia, based on a paper that Eugene Aidman wrote in Frontiers in Psychology a couple of years ago, is getting a lot of traction and a lot of research around, not only for sport, but for military and special forces, this whole notion of how do we measure and then train athlete cognition in the same way that we can measure physical fitness and train physical fitness. We should be able to do the same thing cognitively. So yeah, you asked that question. So what the heck is it? Well, clearly, I think that the single biggest component of it is the ability to attend, focus of attention. And we, as coaches, you've all witnessed that. It's at whatever level, it's usually lack of performances, that the lack of focus for split second, and it could be the victory or a loss. So attention, human attention, is an important component. Working memory is another one. The great athletes can just remember so much, and then so much of it goes into automaticity. So I put those two at the top of the list here. Human attention is part of the big component of cognition, and then the working memory, being able to inhibit doing certain kinds of things. In other words, you aren't deked out by your opponent. You're able to inhibit what they want you to do. So it's that incredible cognitive control at the right time. So again, all these great athletes who are the playmakers make the correct decision most of the time.
Yeah, and with that correct decision, I guess, like, in your book, you talk about decision making being messy, and you reference like some works from Gary Klein's around firefighters, and then I've also read around Matthew Side. He's got his book Bounce, and he referenced the same process around decision making. Like, is decision making one of those skills that once you have that skill set, and then it becomes almost second nature to
Yeah, I think
pick
that's a
up
good
on
way to put
different
it.
cues? Yeah. Like, what are some of the cues that you've seen through your books around playmakers, what they pick up versus, I guess, other athletes that are striving to become playmakers?
Well, there's an attempt, as I was pointing to you before we all jumped on. My good friend Kevin McGraskin, who's in coaching in the soccer world, just came out with this book, Scanning: How to Train It and Develop Game Awareness. And that would be true in your sport as well. That to scan the pitch, to know what's going on, picking up cues, and I work a lot in the world of ice hockey, which is another team sport that's really fast. And so many players, even the elite ones, have not learned how to scan the ice, to read, sit and look for cues, search for cues that will give them that split second advantage on what to do offensively or defensively. And so the soccer folks have studied the great English Premier and Spanish League in particular, of who the great scanners are, who are constantly, they got a swivel on their head, so they're always searching the field to see where their opponents are, where their teammates are, where the next pass should go. All of those things, they're picking up what we just talked about, those cues that the average non-playmaker just does not do. And part of it is they've never been taught to do that. And I know the Spanish, I did some work with them way back when, 2006, 2008, their World Cup team. And just absolutely amazed at how much time they spent on teaching the players, even at the elite level, to be scanning the pitch and pick up those cues a lot quicker. And that'd be true in your sport as well.
So would you say, like, you talk about your work that you've done with, or your passion for ice hockey just there. So Wayne Gretzky, everybody talks about, he just knows where the puck's going to be. Is that just intuitive to him, or is that been developed over time, or a skill set that he's developed over time to anticipate where that passes, where the puck is going to be, so he gets there, so he's that split second ahead of everyone else? Well,
that's a great question you ask. Like now, I mentioned I consult with the free jersey I get from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and they've got Crosby, who's the elite player today in the National Hockey League. But back then, when Gretzky played, they claimed they said he had eyes in the back of his head. So he was often asked that question: was that something that you were born with? And even at a young age, he responded. He says, "No, I learned that from from my father Walter. He taught me how to read situations, to kind of go where the puck's going to be, not where it is now." And in our second book, I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at that. We had the Playmaker's Advantage, and we wrote this one here, Playmaker's Decisions. We have I think chapter 8 on there. We talk quite a bit about the great NBA player Steve Nash, who came out. His father was an elite soccer player from England, and then at that time they were living in Canada, and before he took up basketball. But he basically taught him the kinds of things he learned in soccer, football, to scan and read situations. And so he talks a lot about how that transfer took place, learning how to read and search for cues on the soccer field, and then transfer that to the basketball court. So a lot of these are transferable skills. And I was fortunate to get to meet Nash when I was consulting in Golden State. He was consulting with them at that time too. And now he's He's the head coach in Brooklyn. But he was a brilliant player, and it was all what we talk about as being the ultimate playmaker. You know, undersized. There wasn't a whole lot of genetic material going for him, but he just made incredible decisions and could execute.
Cool. I guess probably the next question that I've got down here, and again, this is literally just picking things out of your book that I think hopefully will resonate with some of our coaches. But you referenced some work from Dr. Bandura around confidence and self-efficacy. Like, how big a part do those two, I guess, those feelings for the athletes, how big a part do they actually play in decision making?
You know, you may have come across that part in the book too, where I got to know Albert Bandura. He just recently passed away. He was darn near 100 years of age, but he is the most cited psychologist in the world. And he was a real avid sports fan, and that's kind of how we connected too. And you and I call what you and I call confidence, Bandura called self-efficacy. And it's kind of, and he distinguished between that and just pure confidence, in the sense that self-efficacy is that, he said, you can't be, I guess there's some overall confidence, but he said, you've got the self-efficacy that it's every little component of what you do professionally. And in the world of sport, there are many different components. You have to have high self-efficacy and as many of those components as possible. And in my opinion, he was so spot on. But you know, you can't be a playmaker without having this incredible high self-efficacy. And I wrote in the book there too that if there was a playmaker in the world of psychology, it would be Albert Bandura. You know, because you know he made everybody else around him better. He stimulated thought, discussion. Just a wonderful teacher and human being, great researcher. Again, if you're going to be the most cited psychologist outside of Freud, you must have been doing something right. So every field has got them, you know,
yeah.
Playmakers. Yeah. So
I know that. And I guess we've just had a question just come in through the chat here from
sure. Mm-hmm.
From one of our listeners. Are there any, or have you seen in your research, is there any common cues that cross over all sports, I guess, that you're aware of around that help with decision making? Hope I've asked that question properly, Blair.
To help with decision making, well, again, this is why kind of we got into the second book too. So many coaches who read the first book wanted to, can you tell us a little bit more of the how to? And that's a difficult thing too. How do you train decision making when you as coaches have never been trained in that area? You've been trained in the tactical aspect of the sport and the fitness, the physical fitness part, but the cognitive fitness, not so much. And so you have to become very creative. And I thought that if we could just heighten coaches' awareness of the importance of cognition and attention and decision making and memory processes, that will make them better coaches. And we're slowly finding out, it's taking time. And now with the work that's coming out of Australia with Eugene Aidman and his colleagues, and I'm working with them on several projects where we're trying to develop a whole curriculum that'll be put on apps that helps identify young talent who are the good thinkers, you know, the sharp tools here, and then help identify them, and then methods to train effective decision making wherever they're playing. So that's all going to kind of come to the forefront here in the next year or two, and I think kind of going to spread pretty much globally. kind of that importance of that. It's, as the coach who wrote the foreword to our book talked, it is the next frontier. He said that coaches have to understand that the cognitive part of performance is the next frontier for coaches to learn. We just haven't gotten into that area.
And I guess just for our coaches that are on here, apart from getting your book and reading it, what are some other ways, like how should coaches start, I guess, exploring that decision-making process with their athletes?
I think many of your coaches are probably already doing it, and certainly I've seen this transformation across all sports. You asked about that earlier, and I'm thinking more of the fast-paced sports. But as well, we all know, time and space, we have to be able to manage that, and that's what you can manage as coaches, to create training opportunities where we're controlling the speed at which they do stuff. That's the time and the space. So these small-sided games have been fantastic developments over the years across all sports, which forces particularly young athletes to learn the sport. And I know even at the professional levels, I see it being done in ice hockey and in soccer, football. They put the players in the tight areas where they have to make quicker decisions in order to perform at the level they're capable of doing. So that's one thing, doing these tight area drills. The other thing that I've always been critical of coaches of, and I understand why they do that, because of the element of time as a coach. You've got an hour, hour and a half, or 2 hours, whatever, but you've got a whole set of things that you want to accomplish in that training period, and so every minute is pretty precious. So one of the things that really prevents good decision making on the part of the athletes, whether the young kids or up to the elite level, is that we're, as coaches and as teachers, we're all teachers, of course, is that it's so much easier for us to tell them what the hell to do, rather than asking them questions. Why did you do this? So when when they execute a certain kind of maneuver, and you wonder, like, where did that come from? Where did that decision come from? Oftentimes coaches will say, you should have done this, rather than asking, so why did you do this? There may have been a very good reason why they did what they did, but we'll never know because they're never challenged to think about it. So I think to get to what your question is, how do we encourage this, is to, as coaches, ask many more questions rather than telling them what to do. And I understand the problem with that is that it's very time consuming, but I think judicious choosing of the times to ask the athletes questions would be well to your advantage as a coach. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
No, that's true for all teachers. The teachers in that field all my life, and most teachers are very guilty of that as well. They're telling, and as parents too, telling kids what to do rather than asking, why did you do that?
Yeah. I'll just quickly throw it out to the group. If there are any questions that you guys want to ask, or just kind of want to explore some of the answers that Dr. Len's given us, just chuck them either into the chat or raise your hand and I'll come back to you and we can get you to answer them or ask them, sorry. I get another question that I've got here, and it probably flows on from what you're talking about with that decision making. With the Toronto Raptors, you mentioned around how they used a lot of technology and in regards to like where the ball is, and I've got GPS track where the players are. How much does, I guess, the analytics of the game benefit the use of decision making or improving an athlete's decision making process?
I think it's worked both ways in a sense that so much decision making is kind of forced upon the athlete today in many sports based on the analytics that they discover, so that it's really taken decision making away from athletes and coaches and managers many times because of what the so-called statistical analysts say is most predictive. So that's the unfortunate part. It's taking away the decision making from coaches, managers, and in many cases also the players. Um, but of course, technology has also made it possible for athletes to strengthen their decision making skills. And I can give you a decent example of that too. For about 4 years now, my colleagues and I have been working on developing an app to increase decision making in baseball and softball and tennis for serve recognition. So basically, we use the kind of the scientific method of visual occlusion. I don't know to what extent you're familiar with that, but basically, you occlude the full movement. You know, the athlete doesn't get to see it all. So if you can imagine a video clip of a baseball, well, let's take tennis, probably more familiar to all of you, the tennis serve. So, you know, the serve is made, but it's stopped. And then showing the video is shown live to the athlete, and they have to make a decision what kind of serve that's going to be and where is it going to land. By picking up the cues on that occluded part of the serve. We do the same thing with baseball. We don't see the whole pitch, but the athletes, the batter in baseball or in softball gets to see the part of the pitch, only part of the pitch, and has to determine what kind of pitch it is. Is it a fastball, a breaking ball, a changeup, or and is it going to be a ball or is it going to be a strike? And so that's the technology that I'm talking about that can facilitate decision making. And we've learned that from the research too, that it's a proven method for training individuals to recognize and pick up cues without having to get into the wear and tear of your body on the baseball field or on the tennis court. You can do it on your chair, looking at your iPhone or your tablet and seeing real live tennis serves or baseball pitches. And we've gone into cricket too, and a few other sports are picking up on what we've been doing with the method of visual occlusion. And I'm sure there's transferable components of it to rugby as well. But it's a good training methodology to enhance decision-making of athletes. So it's a long answer to your question of where does technology fit into this? It's kind of got good news and bad news. But I've always been in the technology world, and I think I lean towards it having more promise than deficits.
Yeah, it's funny that you used the example of the baseball pitch and the tennis serve. I read recently around a professional table tennis player trying to take a professional tennis player's serve, and although he was an elite table tennis player, he couldn't pick up the cues of the serve, and so he was reacting on where the ball was going to, or trying to react on where the ball was going to bounce and where it was going to be, versus what a Roger Federer would do. He'd pick up on that serve cue. Is that there? So does that mean that decision making is a time in the, I guess we go back to it, time in the seat type situation? Like the more that we become, I guess, exposed to the game, we get exposed to these cues a lot more often, and then we can start picking up those subtle cues that others don't pick up or don't see.
Exactly right. Yeah, and what's interesting, when we interviewed so many of these so-called playmaker athletes, they all were making an advocate, pleading for not in getting involved in early specialization of a sport. And I said, well, why do you say that? because you learn something from all the sports. There's transferable components, these little subtle little cues that I learned in baseball, I could do in soccer, I could use in basketball, I can use in ice hockey. They're all kind of transferable skills. And it's learning to pick up cues, particularly in these fast-paced sports. So, that's always been my theory on that. So, but it was good to hear from the players and so many of the coaches too, who just argued against early sports specialization for young kids. That, play a variety of sports. You never know what the heck you're going to be good at, but equally important is the fact that your whole decision-making process is going to get better. Plus your athleticism too, general athleticism, the transfer of skills.
I know this. Oh, that's another question I've got here. So in regards to, I guess that probably that early specialization piece that you're just discussing here, are there ways today that we might be able to identify potential playmakers, whether like a lot of our coaches are coaching athletes that are probably playing for or in senior grade, so men and female spaces, but some of them do deal with a lot of like late teenagers. Are there ways that as coaches we can identify that potential playmakers, or is it more in the youth sport where we need to identify them?
Well, 2022, we're still grappling with that question, but I have extreme confidence in my colleagues that I'm working with in Australia, where, as I told you earlier, they're developing an app to look at this whole dimension of cognitive fitness. First, you have to be able to measure the components of fitness, whether it's attention, memory processes, whatever. But there's no standardized assessment tool right now that does that. But that'll be with us in a year or so. And I think that'll be a real gift for coaches and organizations. We're looking for the cognitively talented athlete. There may be some sports where coaches could care less about that, but they want the physical attributes to forget about the cognitive part. But I think more and more coaches really understand the importance of the cognitive attributes that are so crucial for successful athletes, and become playmakers. So right now we don't have anything. A colleague of mine had pretty good success over here in North America, particularly in the NBA and the NFL. He developed a tablet form of an assessment called the AIQ, Athlete Intelligence Quotient, much like IQ, but it's for Athlete Intelligence Quotient, and basically developed an assessment to get at these cognitive attributes. And organizations are interested in so-called smart player. You can identify on the AIQ. It takes about a half an hour to do it on a tablet. But right now it was only validated for I believe 16 years of age and above. So it wouldn't be particularly beneficial for younger athletes. But that's what's available right now. You probably, even in New Zealand, have heard of the National Football League for many, many years used an assessment called the Wonderlic, which was a primitive IQ test. And they were trying to identify whether people were smart enough. I don't know why they wanted to know that, smart enough to play in the National Football League. But it was mainly to identify particular quarterbacks. Could they read plays rapidly and understand plays? So, but it had a racial component to it, where many people thought. And so I think Scott Goldman's AIQ is, at least for now, making some good traction. And there will probably be other devices that or systems for assessing will be coming out in the next few years. And I think the work out of Australia is going to be a big one.
Well, it sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Another chapter that kind of fascinated me in your book is around the clutch and choke of performance engine. And so you discussed around how there are some similarities between clutch moments and flow in the flow state. Or are you able to explain what that something else is? Because there's a little bit of something else into being a clutch environment rather than just being in flow itself.
Well, yeah, the clutch has a specific component. It's funny you mentioned that too. We thought we were so clever when we wrote that title for that chapter, the clutch and the choke of the performance engine. And as the book came out, I said to myself, I wonder how many of the young readers would know what the hell a clutch is or a choke is on an engine in an automobile. They're kind of extinct terms over here, at least in North America. Nobody drives with a clutch in a car anymore, or uses a choke. So anyhow, that's kind of a side piece to the clutch and choke. But no, I think being in the flow state is when you kind of you're an automatic pilot and everything seems to be going the way you want it. But they're relatively rare events. I know there's been individuals who've worked hard to develop ways in which we can bring athletes into the flow state kind of voluntarily and on purpose. And it's really hard to do. They seem like they're almost random events, but everybody kind of knows when they're in that flow state. The difference, I think, with the clutch is that somebody like a Steph Curry, when I just watched him the other night, and last game they played against the Celtics, it was 43 points, just absolutely clutch performer. Like they're making sure that they've got their best people guarding him on defense, and yet he still manages to perform these incredible shots from down near mid-court. So he has the ability to score those points in clutch moments deep in the game. So there's not everybody can come through in the clutch. And I think something like basketball where, yeah, there's defense, but it's still you're the one that has to execute. It's not like in a sport like baseball where, unless you hit a home run, you may hit the ball as hard as you ever hit but it's right at somebody and it becomes an out. So there's sometimes situations where you don't have full control over the situation. So yeah, there's something about that clutch, and certain individuals are able to perform. I'm thinking trying to go into more individual sports. You take a sport like golf, where we kind of learned who the clutch performers really are. I just watched McIlroy this weekend in the Canadian Open. Incredibly clutch shots when he had to execute. But golf is one of those unique sports where you're pretty much in control of everything. There's nobody defending you or trying to tackle you while you're striking the ball. So those are the kind of the best measures, I think, of clutch performers. It's a little tougher, although we can in team sports, although we can have clutch team performance where everybody rises to the occasion and everybody on the starting lineup and the reserves play their very best game at that moment. So then it becomes a clutch team victory.
That's an awesome answer. That was that one chapter when I saw it in the thing was in the book in the index. That was the one chapter that I was looking forward to getting to, and I thought I really liked the part where you were talking about the urgency as well. Like you referenced the story around Tom Brady when they played the Falcons, and he was running up and down the sideline, and he was asking his teammates for, I guess, more energy and to more dedication out on the field and whatnot. But there was a sense of flow. Everybody was in a sense of flow, but they're also in a sense of urgency. But it didn't seem, or from what I took from it, because I watched the game as well, it wasn't panic.
Yeah,
or
that's right. There was an urgency, but no panic.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great examples in the past decade in high performance sport that most of the world got to see. And I kind of use that as a reference point as I watch some contemporary things in the last couple of years across a variety of team sports that you can watch on television from around the world. Yeah.
And I guess in those panic states, I guess a lot of stuff happens internally in the body around like adrenaline, and cortisone stuff, all that type, cortisols and all those types of chemicals are starting to, do they inhibit decision making, do you feel, or is?
Well, it comes back to that kind of that inverted U curve where you like to get pumped up with the cortisol and adrenaline, but there's a point of diminishing returns. So yeah, you want to be kind of get it going up, and you get that right amount. When you get too much, and then you're over aroused, and then it affects not only your motor system, but your cognitive processes too. You make strange decisions under pressure, things that you wouldn't normally do. So yeah, the body reacts to the corticosteroids as well.
We've actually got a great question in here from one of the viewers, Brad McKenzie. So I might actually get Brad to unmute himself, and I'll let him ask you.
Sure.
Take it away, Brad.
You there, Brad?
Sorry, mate, I am here. I've popped out the little screen where my question's gone. Hang on. Here we go. I just wondered how influential are like external factors to athletes who are good decision makers in terms of if they've had a tough day or they've got something else going on in their life, how does that influence their decision making when they're put into high pressure situations? And also, how do you create consistency in these players to make good decisions more often?
That is a great question. I've made it a point to spend time around many of the athletes that we interviewed for the book on who were the playmakers and the great decision makers. They're kind of playmakers in more ways than one, not just on the sporting field, but life in general. They're just incredibly class individuals. We're just good people. I can't say that I could describe any one of those individuals who I would call the playmakers as being not a nice person. So they're playmakers in many ways. And I think one of the hallmarks of these individuals too is that they are incredibly consistent, from not only in their performance on the field, but also kind of in life in general. They're just basically good people, and good people on and off the court. That's what I've observed. Nobody kind of just jumps out at me that's kind of an exception to that rule. And I suspect that many of you have found that yourselves as coaches. You want to comment back on that, Brad?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess where I was coming from also is that when we're not as club coaches, we're not necessarily dealing with those real high performance athletes that have
you're right. Yeah,
been exposed to to good habits for long times. It was just sort of around. Are there tools with those club level athletes that you see potential in and do make good decisions at times around like flushing that home life or out of them to be better contributors to your team?
Yeah, and I think as coaches at the club level too, it's important that you do spend quality time with these young athletes to basically foster some of those championship attributes and use examples of athletes at the elite level that they know of, and tell stories about them that they can emulate, and so that they can get a consistency to their performance and kind of work their way up to being the playmaker. And as a coaching staff, ask them to be comfortable with and having confidence in the ability to be a playmaker and take charge. But it's something I think as coaches we have to foster as well. It doesn't come necessarily automatically to the young club athlete.
Yeah, totally. No, that's cool. Thank you.
Good.
We've also got another question in from Sam, so I might get Sam to mute himself and get him to ask his amazing question.
All right.
Yeah, cheers, Riki. Look, I recently finished a book by Phil Jackson, who was the head coach of the Lakers and the Chicago Bulls throughout their glory days. He used the spirituality and oneness within his teams, where he would really be able to draw on the different senses of the players to encourage a team alignment. Say, turn off the lights, right, you have to go and play. Or in this training session, no one's allowed to actually use their voice. So actually trying to train different parts of their senses to create a togetherness. Question that I have around that is, there's obviously a level of trust between teammates that would have to be in play to really get the benefit of that sort of exercise. How, in your expertise, do you think building trust within teammates really allows that flow state to come through?
Oh gosh, there's I don't know if any of these coaches ever engaged in teaching trust to young athletes. We used to do an exercise called a trust fall. Any of you engaged in that at all?
I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you'd think that everybody around the world has done it at different times, but I have found that to be a wonderful. Now you got to be very careful with, because there's an element of risk in there. You got to take safety into account. But I think what you're getting at is, before you can do a variety of other exercises, having trust amongst the teammates is so important. And how do you build that? And I think you have to engage in these exercises first. And I even used that with the Spanish national team, and they had, back in 2006, none of them had ever done it before, which amazed me. But it brought a lot of kind of not only trust, but a kind of an appreciation for something different, because they were so conventional and traditional in the way they trained. But I was trying to get across the whole element of trusting your teammates on the pitch. But it goes beyond trusting your teammates on the pitch. It's kind of trust in a lot of other aspects of life as well.
I just want to touch on something there real quickly. Sorry, Sam, if you're going to follow up, but you talked about like an element of risk, obviously, with the trustful. With decision making, would you say that there would be also an element of risk for playmakers to go out there and create that trust within themselves to perform that whatever they're doing, if it's Steph Curry taking a 3-point shot or making the right pass, or if it's Wayne Gretzky or Crosby doing the same thing on the ice. Like, there's always going to be that element of risk. I'm not too sure what the question is there, but
well, no, I think I know where you're getting at. Yeah, these playmakers, amongst the many attributes, is that one is that they will be risk takers, but they're calculated risk takers. They kind of know when to take that risk based on certain cues they've read. So they recognize that there's a high risk pass that they're going to take, or a high risk shot, but it's a calculated one. So like Curry taking those mid courts, that's high risk. It's usually giving up a rebound to the other team, but he's got the confidence that there's a decent chance I'm going to make it too. So no, there's you're right about that. There's and the playmakers, they are risk takers, but they're typically calculated risks that they take.
And would you think that they see not failure, but if they take the risk and they don't get the reward, they see that as, I know what to do to fix it? Do you think they have that self-regulating, I guess, ability to fix their mistakes quite easily, or?
What I've discovered is that they don't worry too much about, making a mistake. That confidence element that we talked about earlier comes back into play here. They're pretty darn sure they're gonna experience success and not failure. And again, they tend not to be individuals who want to make up for the mistake they made. And you'll see that with lesser players, that they will then engage in a more high risk play because of a mistake they just made, rather than it'll all balance out.
Yeah, and I guess that probably lends to the environment that they're in. Would you say so? Like Crosby being at the Pittsburgh Penguins, what type of environment is Crosby in to be able to play the way that he plays, with the freedom that he has to be able to make decisions that he makes, to be able to, I guess, goes through that whole search, decide.
Yeah, that's a good question you ask, because Crosby was put into that situation at the age of 18. And he flourished almost immediately. He was so darn mature for his age. And so now he's played, 15 years in the National Hockey League, and he's still at the elite level. He's kind of on the bottom side of the curve here. But he was put into that situation at a very young age to become a leader, and just flourished. And he had some good mentorship from Mario Lemieux, who became the team owner ultimately. But I think he was put in a situation where he really wasn't allowed to fail. Yeah.
And that's really interesting. Wasn't allowed to fail. So what do you mean by that? Like, that he wasn't allowed to fail? Is it because there was no such thing as whatever he was doing, they didn't see that as a failure, or is it because they pushed him really hard?
Yeah, they expected a lot from him. They knew that he had that desire, that burning desire to be the best, and they surrounded him with good players as well, and they won immediately, and it just kept winning over this time frame. And that was a great investment for him.
Yeah, and I'll probably go back to what you mentioned earlier with and we'll try and draw some parallels here with ice hockey, but you talk about they played a lot of small-sided games to try and to speed up play, to obviously put the players under pressure a lot more, and to get them to try and make the right decision. In those environments, like how do the coaches frame up those scenarios? Like how do they explain what they're trying to get from the athletes, or what they want to see from the athletes?
Yeah, they kind of create situations that could happen in ice hockey on the full sheet of ice, but you could do it on any playing surface. You just create a small area, and you create a situation that's it's a hypothetical one, but it's realistic. It'll happen many times during the course of a game, and they want them to simulate that at a rapid pace. And there isn't. It's amazing how the athletes they know what the goal is here. Is that we're going to be doing something that we're doing on the big surface, and we're doing it in a tight area, so that we can speed everything up. And I remember in the early days when this was happening in different sports, athletes had struggled with it, but most young athletes today kind of understand the concept of tight area and why it's being designed.
Yeah, and so are the coaches looking at, like, obviously as coaches we look at like the technical skill set that the player is executing, but are these coaches looking more, or should our coaches be looking more at seeing what I guess that decision-making process unfolding? Like, are they recognizing those cues? And does that go back to what you talked about earlier around feedback and how important that is, or for asking those questions?
Yeah. I think it's important that coaches use that opportunity to coach them on their thinking processes as well as the technical things. That clearly they're going to be technical, tactical things that they're doing on the pitch that being compromised sometimes, and you have to make those kinds of corrections. And we tend not to correct them on the decisions they made or what they were looking for in their searching for cues.
Yeah. I guess since like the big reason, I guess, getting you here was around your book, which I highly recommend everybody gets a copy of, The Playmaker's Advantage and Decision if they get a chance. But since I guess the publication of your book, have any other coaches or authors like contributed to training athlete cognition, or has there been any more research that you've seen come through?
Yeah, for sure. For you coaches, I mentioned earlier to the scanning book by McGreskin here in soccer. He does a lot of what I wrote about too, specific more to soccer. He's a high-level coach, but also that I mentioned earlier too, the work that came out of Dr. Eugene Aidman's publication on cognitive fitness that was published in Frontiers in Psychology, and now they're trying to convert this into an applied concept. And I think as coaches, you should kind of follow that literature. I'll be glad to send it any references that you may want to continue to kind of follow, because I think that's going to become really hot stuff within the next year or two, and will help you a lot on developing your own ideas. How do we train? How do we measure? And how do we train cognition in young athletes? Simple as that.
Yeah, I know that's
now, those are the only two that's where the major work is being done, is coming out of Australia right now.
Yeah, I know that's cool. We've just got a question in here from Matt Keane. Don't worry about the kids, Matt. You jump on and ask your question, mate.
Here you go. Sorry if the kids make a bit too much noise. I'm just trying to find.
No problem.
How do I scroll down this thing, right? Can't see it. Basically, it was along the lines of, you've spoken a lot about playmakers, decision making. Do you think that playmakers' decisions are different to other team members' decision making. I'm kind of thinking in rugby terms, we've got 9s and 10s, fullbacks that are sort of drivers and playmakers, but there's also players like the Severeses and wingers who decide a lot maybe faster and react to the situation quicker for their individual decisions, whether to run, pass or catch. Do you think it's the same process, or is that slightly different, if that kind of makes sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. We use one example in the book on that too, where we talked to the Boston Celtics coach at the time, and we assumed that the point guard was the playmaker. Everybody would have the casual sports fan would have said the point guard was the playmaker on the Celtics team at that time. And he said, no, it was Al Horford, the defensive guy that you wouldn't expect, but he was really our playmaker. And that kind of opened my eyes and ears to kind of the question you're asking here. Can you have athletes in positions that are, like using American football as quarterback as an example, the kind of the team leader, and they would be the playmaker. But no, there could be these defensive stalwarts who play a non-visible role oftentimes in the game. They're the real playmaker in their domain. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, that's kind of leads. I wrote a note down earlier saying that if what the hell, where was it? Sorry. If search, decide, and execute are the keys to making good decisions, if you trained everybody in being able to search, maybe playmakers could focus on deciding and executing. That would then make more effective playmakers. So yeah, kind of, don't know if it links in, but yeah, if that makes sense again.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. Yeah, that was a great question.
Cool. Cheers, Matt. Has anybody else got anything that maybe any questions that they may have for Dr. Len here, or they potentially maybe they might even have something that they'd like to challenge Dr. Len on, get him thinking a little bit more.
Again, I'll be glad to send you some reading material that might help you guys out too. I'll just forward them to you. Is that okay?
Yeah, that would be amazing. I guess my last question. I've got 2 questions. So before we close up shop, and we'll allow a couple of people to get in their last questions. But what was it about decision making? I guess the psychology of it and the sports cognition side of things. What drove you into this field to understand decision making better?
I just realized all the high performance teams I worked with, they, use me for my psychological expertise, and yet I thought that it kind of evolved into kind of in the whole sports psychology field was more dealing with athlete confidence and performing under pressure, preventing choking from taking place, and so forth, athlete anxiety, preventing depression. And I'm thinking to myself all those years that, I've witnessed so many athletes that are just smart as hell on the pitch. And we somehow can't identify that. And we can't identify it, and it's pretty hard to train. So I just thought kind of at the tail end of my academic career, that's something I wanted to focus on. And then little did I realize that there would be a strong interest in it from the part of coaches. They were very intrigued by that idea. They just want to know, like, how do we identify these so-called athlete intelligence, if you will, and how do we go ahead and train it? And I thought this would be kind of a culminating point in my career where I could get onto something new that hasn't been part of the enterprise in sport, and see if I could make a difference to the world of sport. So that's kind of what moved me in that direction. Little did I realize that it would get as much traction as it did. So I'm still having fun with it.
Yeah, I know, that's cool. Well, we thank you for we definitely thank you for all the work that you've been doing in the field of decision making and that. So it's awesome. One big question that I do have, I guess we're all coaches, and we all have probably a coach that kind of impacted us when we first started playing sports. And so
yeah,
I guess, who was your most impactful coach that you've had that had coached you when you were, I imagine that you played sports, and so who was the most impactful coach that you had, and why?
You know, what's interesting is that the most impactful person that got me into this whole enterprise, if you will, of performance psychology, if you will, was, I mentioned him a lot in the book in the early stages, Dr. Murray Smith, who passed away about a year ago. He was at the University of Alberta, where I did my undergraduate training. And he was doing this stuff before anybody else was. And he had a big impression on me. At that time, he didn't have his doctorate. He went back and got his doctorate in educational psychology. But he was a coach in every major sport in Canada at the university level. I was never coached personally by him, but I spent a lot of time with him. Until recent years when he passed away, but we exchanged a lot of information. But it was his passion for this, we weren't calling cognition, but it was kind of the mental side of sport. And I think we're going to change that vocabulary a little bit to kind of the cognitive dimensions of performance will be the new term that's going to be coming up in the next several years.
I know, that's cool. I'll have to do a little bit of research on Murray Smith there. It sounds like he's got some.
Dr. Murray Smith, yeah. Yeah, he just passed away about a year or so ago.
Yeah.
But what a brilliant contributor to the world of sport, yeah.
I know, that's amazing. Well, I guess there doesn't seem to be any more questions that I can see pop up. So I just want to say on behalf of myself and the Canterbury Rugby coaches that we have here, just thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge and wisdom with us, and being super open with everything that you've explained to us. It's hopefully going to help our coaches take some cool wee gold nuggets back to their environments, and hopefully start creating a few more playmakers within the Canterbury region and the rugby environment. So, and they'll be all accredited to yourself and your work. So, but if our coaches do get curious after this, what's the best way they can, I guess, research you and find some of your works apart from getting some of your books?
Well, they could probably find me on Google. I've done a few, people track me down. If you Googled my name on there, you'd probably find out a bunch of stuff that I've done. But I'll be glad to send to you, Riki, and you can share with all of your coaches some literature that might be advantageous to your coaches, and other information that kind of will better your life as young coaches.
Yeah, I know, it's awesome. Cool. Well, thank you very much. For those coaches that are really, if they're keen to stay on, I'll let Dr. Len go. But if you're keen to stay on and want to kind of chat through some of the bits that you've picked up through today's session, and maybe share some of the notes that you may have gotten versus some of the notes somebody else has gotten, that would be cool. So thank you again, Dr. Len. I'm sure we'll keep in keep in contact.
Oh, sure. My pleasure. And feel free to share my email. It's an easy one, sport@bu.edu. And I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, I know, that's awesome. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much
Thanks, Lynn.
for the opportunity. Okay, bye-bye.